essay series, which is solution design and architecture. First of all, thank you so much for all your enthusiasm to join this session. So let me turn on my video. Great, awesome. So thank you so much. So we know that today's weekend, so it's a weekend evening, and then still we are seeing a good number of participants. So thank you so much for your interest. So coming back to the session, so far we have seen in our essay series what is solution architect and what kind of roles and responsibilities he will have, and then we have also seen what kind of work that SA and BA will do in parallel and all those things. And today, which is day 3, so we are going to look more in details about the actual solution design and then architecture and what other things will be uh, taking into consideration while doing these activities. So before we actually get started, I would like to give a quick introduction about myself. So myself, Praveen. So I'm part of EY India, wherein I'm playing a capability lead role for UiPath, where I'll take care about entire UiPath, like entire UiPath management, wherein I take care about infra, COE setup, and then architecture, and then resource management, project handling, and then go to market, everything. So now also I'm a certified trainer from UiPath, where I delivered multiple training sessions on foundation certification, foundation level, and then advanced courses, along with specific tool specific trainings across multiple regions. So coming to today's agenda, so we are going to discuss about what is actual solution designing, right? And how we are going to design it in any RPA project. And also we're going to see how come RE framework, right, is involved in this solution design phase and what kind of impact that this RE framework gonna do while designing a solution. So after discussing these two things, we'll be knowing so what is an SDD and then why do we need to do, and also we'll see what are the key core components of an SDD which is must and should be followed. And also most of you people have certain questions on SDD, on what phase it needs to be and how it can be updated, modified, approvals, and all these things we are going to discuss throughout the session, along with certain best practices while you're designing the solution for any automation process. So coming to the solution design, right? So this is the most important phase in the entire automation life cycle, because the best way, I mean, like the based on the way you design the solution, right, the accuracy or the effectiveness of your bot performance will be I mean, like your accuracy will be maintained based on your solution, right? So if you have a poor design, right, and that's where it will impact your process flow in the runtime. So while designing such solution, right, what are the things you need to ideally consider, right? So what are the key components that you need to focus more while designing any solution for any project in the RPA? So we have listed down here certain things like the process analysis and robot configuration, exception handling, and then integration points, security and compliance, scalability and user experience, testing and validation, and mainly the last but not least, the documentation. So when it comes to the first phase, which is the process analysis, and this is the place where the essay plays a very crucial role to do a fit analysis for the automation, right? Just because we have done the process analysis for XYZ process, it may not be required that that process will fit into the automation scope, right? It's a duty of an essay to actually do that fit analysis for the automation and then proceed with the next action items, right? So it is very important from essay standpoint to do a proper analysis for the process before actually stepping into the next phases of the RP lifecycle. At the same time, we also need to consider the robot configurations, whether we are going to with a single bot architecture or a multi-bot architecture, and what kind of schedule we are planning for this bot, and what kind of like impact it going to bring if it breaches SLA, and all those things we need to properly handle. And the next thing is exception handling. So as all of us are from the automation background, and we know the purpose of exception handling and the importance of it, right? So every exception handling is kind of in heart of each and every process, because if the exception handle, I mean, like exceptions are not properly handled throughout the process, it might end up leading to like erroneous output, or it may not produce the error at all, but still stuck it in infinite loops or whatnot. So there might be multiple scenarios which we might encounter due to the poor exception handling. And also SA needs to take care about the integration points. Let's say if the process is integrated with multiple data sources and all, so it needs to be properly analyzed by the SA, and also need to take proper action items. So for a example, if we are dealing with any SQL server, right, SQL Server DB. In that case, so it is our responsibility to make sure we are establishing the connection properly, and also we need to make sure we are closing the connection properly. Because what happens if we don't close the connection properly, because it's an automation and it runs in a loop for multiple transactions, we might initiate a more number of connections which might encounter issue from the database standpoint. So these are the things, certain things we need to consider when we are integrating with our external applications for our automation. And security and compliance are the key roles. We need to take care about our data security, and then compliance issue related to the sharing and storing of the data. And then scalability, the bot should be scalable enough to fit the actual requirement from the automation. They might have peak hours, they might have non-peak hours. So while designing it, we need to clearly consider our peak hours and non-peak hours, and accordingly we need to provide the schedule. It should not be like just because you have peak hours for 1 month and then we will be scheduling the entire process for a couple of hours on the throughout year, right? So that is not the effective way of utilizing the robots. And user experience, so here the user experience comes from the way he's interacting with the robot and the way you robot is interacting with the human, right? So both should be seamlessly proper, because there should not be no hiccup saying that what robot user is saying. It should be clearly conveyed to the robot. At the same time, what kind of outputs generated by the robot should be clearly explanatory for the end user. Accordingly, he can take the actions. So testing and validation, so we do all these things in our development phase. And then last one is documentation. So most of you have a question, so where exactly this entire solution design comes into picture? Is it only for the initial phase, or will it come on the next phases of it? So though you may not do the entire solution design throughout the life cycle, but the SDD, the importance of SDD lies across the life cycle, irrespective whether it is in the build phase or manage phase, or finally you deployed it in hypercare. Still the SDD plays a very crucial role, and it can be altered at any point of time. So that's where you cannot simply say that the STD portion will only come in the discovery phase and will never come in the deployment phase. It was never like that. Why? We are going to discuss in a very soon. And the next thing, and a very important thing, is what is the purpose of RE framework in solution design? So we all know that it's a framework provided by UiPath, so to make our codes uniform across the organizations and UiPath implementations, and also which comes with the best exception handling mechanism out of the box, and also comes with seamless integration with UiPath queues for either you use it in a single board architecture or multi-board architecture. It works perfectly well, right? So these are the few out of the box functionalities. But why does this RE framework coming into the solution design? It should ideally coming in the development phase, right? But this RE framework is something which needs to be considered while during the design. The reason is, in the design phase, it is important for us to understand whether we are using queues or not. If we are using queues, are we going to build it in a dispatcher and performer mode because of the multi-bot architecture? And if yes, and then that classification happens, right? Because of that dispatcher and performer, we separate and then we initiate a different sort of flows and all. So that's where we also need to consider whether we are using RE framework for this process or not. Because uh, based on your experience in our automation industry, you people might have seen processes which we might use RE framework, and there might be certain processes which doesn't run in a transactional base, correct? So for all such processes, a lot of cases people will get a question, do I need to actually use RE framework because my process is linear and then doesn't come into in a loop mechanism? I don't have any transactions. It doesn't run for hours and all. It's just a linear process, but still do I need to use RE framework? And for that's where the question comes, because the RE framework is not just for the transactional purpose alone, right? RE framework is for uh, exception handling. You can use it for the best exception handling and then best process flow, because the way the RE framework navigates the flow is amazing, right? And that's where we use RE framework, whether it is linear or in a iterative processes you do. But only thing is you might be doing some sort of manipulations within the RE framework so that it will fit your linear process, right? If in case you are using dispatcher and performer, and that's where anyway you will be understanding it. But the one more major consideration you need to consider when you are using RE framework with a multi-bot architecture, and that is the output. Let's say you are running a process which runs in a loop, right? Which runs for a couple of hours and then executes hundreds and thousands of transactions. Because of this transaction count or the huge number of transactions, you might consider a multi-bot architecture. And this is where you need to face challenges when you are generating the output. Because in a multi-bot architecture, so you need to definitely consider the output mechanism, right? Because as each bot tries to fetch the latest available transaction and it will keep on processing those transactions, there should be some sort of consideration you need to do to merge all the bots output, and you need to trigger it to the end user. Or else what happens, he might receive multiple output files from each and every bot. User may not feel that great when you're working with it, because again it will be an additional efforts from the user standpoint to consolidate all of them and then generate a final output. And that is where this RE framework is important to be considered in the design phase. If in case you are doing it, what kind of measures you need to take to generate a proper single output, and then how you're handling it. Okay, and coming to the next thing, so the main hot topic of the session, which is our SDD, right? So I hope all of us are aware about the documentations we follow in our automation practice. So there are two major documents we follow. One is PDD and then SDD. And the PDD stands for Process Design Document or Process Definition Document. People name it differently. Wherein SDD stands for Solution Design Document or Software Design Document on an overall general terms. So it depends, but ideally in our RPA, we call it as a solution design document. So in this SDD, we have certain components we follow specific to our automation, right? And then this SDD plays a very major bridge, right? Major role in establishing a bridge between the stakeholders and the development process people, and ideally who are taking care about the entire automation, right? Because it serves like a bible, because based on what we agreed and what is happening. And also people who are working with PDD and SDD closely, you can differentiate between PDD and SDD, right? Because PDD is something where we understand what is a process as is, and then we also define to be based on the automation and all. But SDD doesn't talk about as is and doesn't talk about to be. It talks something very technical, right? And that's where it plays a very important key role in our series. And also that's where a solution architect plays a very major role in preparing this SDD along with the developer. So people might have seen developers also being involved in updating certain fields in the SDD, but also architect also plays a very key role in updating the master data or major components from the SDD document. So while you are creating SDD, you need to consider the automation scope, which is coming from your PDD as is, sorry, 2B, which is finalized. And then you need to take care about interactions on what are the applications that the bot is interacting with, either it may be SAP or Excel file or DB, etc., etc. If it is Excel, and if you're performing huge operations on the Excel DB, you might need to be take care about the memory leak exceptions, sorry, memory leak issues. And if you are running with a DB, and then you need to take care about the establishing of connections and disconnecting them. And if you are working with SAP, and then you also need to be considering how many sessions are being opened, and then whether the session is properly closed or not. And people who are working with SAP, so there is one way, most of the cases people might simply kill the SAP, but in certain configurations, just because you kill SAP, that may not close the SAP properly, right? So that's where you we need to do additional activities to close all the instances that are running in the background for that SAP jobs. So these are certain things you need to consider from the bot interaction standpoint. And then exception handling, as we discussed earlier. So we need to consider exceptions from the business standpoint as well as the runtime exceptions. And UI UX, though we don't have UI much used in our automation because we are not going to develop any of the front end part here. But why do I mention UI in this? Because though we don't do anything appealing or we don't create for the end user, but the output, right? Sometimes we might play with emails, and we might play with writing or like providing some tabular format or some customized mail bodies and all those things. And that's where the UI comes into picture. So it, some at cases it might be required, because I've seen in a couple of projects where the business are following certain format of emails while triggering to their customers, which consists of certain fonts, colors, right? And then spacings and all those things, and then icons or the images. So it is required for the bot to follow the very same thing, right? And that's where it also important for us to do the HTML coding for our email bodies, right? And then data flow. So where we need to clearly understand how the data is coming from, and then what kind of manipulation we are applying on it, and then finally what kind of conversion we are doing to it before sending it to the end user. So in this this entire process needs to be like properly analyzed and then organized. Because let me give you an example. So let's say there is a transaction which comes from an input, and then you are processing it, and the user never said that whether the transaction might come in the next run or not. But we, even if we don't also consider whether the transaction might come on the next day or not, so what happens if the next day the transaction comes and we execute it? And that's fair. So it's going to hit a duplicate if the system is not capable enough to identify the duplicates, right? So this might lead to a very major issue, especially when you are dealing with financial related processes. So that's where it is very important understanding the data flow. So whether is there a chance of getting duplicate or repetitive transactions? If yes, can the existing systems flag it out? No. Then you need to understand how to identify those transactions in the unique fashion, so that we will flag them out and then update the end user. Because this is a major issue I've seen in most of the projects. If people don't consider about the duplicates while designing the process flow, but while you are executing things in the production, you will end up getting the very similar issues. And workflow logic is majorly for your entire business flow. So how well you are defining your logic. Because if you see, the UiPath is such a tool which has the flexibility to directly integrate with the programming, right? So you can get all the functionalities from the programming, which though whether you have activities or not in UiPath. So that is the beauty of UiPath. So when you have that very large scale scope, right, availability for you, you need to think properly while writing a logic. So you just you should not be simply thinking from drag and drop perspective. You also need to understand what kind of impact it's gonna do for the process, not for UiPath or the business, for the system, right? How it gonna impact your resources of your system, whether it gonna hike your CPU utilization, or whether it's gonna eat up your memory from the RAM standpoint. So how well you're gonna clean them up whenever not necessary, that will make your process run much faster and smoothly without creating an exception. People who might have worked with very large scale Excel applications, they might have seen this sort of error related to Excel object failing in the background, right? That is not an issue from the, neither an issue from the UiPath nor from the technology perspective. It's because you're not handling the memory in the backend, so which is like spiking up your CPU utilization and then blocking that object, right? So these are the certain things which SA need to consider for sure while designing the solution. So basis on these things, your exception rate will be heavily reduced. Okay, so far we have seen about multiple. So far we have seen what is solution design, and then what are the key components, importance of RE framework, and then what are the importance of SDD and all. So now we'll look into one template of SDD which is not filled, but we will go through the components which are part of SDD. Okay. So for demo purpose, I'm using the SDD template from UiPath Automation Hub. Ideally, you people who have experience with automation definitely might have seen the SDD template different from this, because SDD template is customized based on the organization need. So that's where this is not an universal document which will be common across all the organizations. Based on organization to organization, this is something which gets customized based on the need. Okay, so just to make standard approach across all of the audience, so I'm using Automation Hub, which covers the most common things. I understand people who use different templates might have different components, but this is something which will cover most of the common ground across all the organizations. Okay, so the first thing this document describes is about its purpose, right? What kind of things you are doing, why it is required, right? What kind of data you're covering, and all these things. So the purpose it will give, and then also it will give the details about the process you're automating. So let's say you're doing an invoice processing. So that's where it will give the details about it. It may not give each and every minute detail of what your process, or on a top notch, it will explain you. So what is this process about? And then who are the business things that, I mean, like business teams involved, right? And then what is the input that is being injected to this process, and what is the outcome that we are expecting from this process. On a top notch, we will be narrating that. So this sort of a tabular format will maintain explaining the process name. Though we explain everything in the narrative manner, still we keep it in this tabular format for certain details, so that if someone sees quickly, they'll understand, okay, this is the process and all. Okay, and then robot type, and then orchestrator used or not, yes or no, and then scalable. So as we discussed previously, so the when it comes to the multi-board architecture or a single board architecture, so the scalable comes in multiple journals, so I don't want to touch base on all for now. The scalability comes whether the bot can auto scale up when during peak hours or not. So in that case, you can give it and then explain that accordingly. And then we also mentioned UiPath version used. And one more thing that is best to follow in this SDD document is about the versioning, right? Because as I mentioned previously, the SDD document is something which we will use throughout the life cycle of like automation. We might modify this document throughout the process, may or may not, but the chances are that there are chances that you might modify this process after deployment, or after development, or after hypercare, or after a certain period of time the process executed in the production. So at that point of time, if in case you need to modify something in the document, and that's where it's good to have a version history page or something like that, where you specify who developed it initially, and what was the version, on what date it was completed or signed off, who signed off it, and then likewise you can maintain the versions. So by that way, it will give a clear understanding about what are the phases that SDD has gone through, or the how many versions that the SDD was rendered to this current version, right? And the next thing is, this is about our runtime. So where we discussed, SDD talks more about the technical rather than explaining what is in process or what are the steps of the process, because that is something which we have already done in PDD, right? We have clearly explained everything, each and every step, each and every business logic, how the process flows, and who are the business owners, and to whom need to be responded, and then all the business functionality, data, samples, everything will be captured in your PDD. So that is where in your SDD, this is more about technical terms on what you have designed the solution. It's not about what business is following on this day. It's more about what you are giving back to the business through the automation, right? So architectural structure of master project, and this is where most of the people confuse between architectural diagram to a flow diagram. These two are a little bit different, both are not same, guys. So if you people think the flow diagram is as same as architecture diagram, and that's not true. All right, so this is something which talks about how your entire flow is integrated with robot, orchestrator, humans, your data, whether it may be SAP or Excel or SQL Server or any DB, right? How that integration is happening, and how a proper firewall is maintained so that there is a fallback mechanism considered. So this is something which this architecture diagram talks about. And if you refer any of the UiPath, ideally infra architecture diagram and all these things, you people might have observed clearly one server, and then the robots, studios, users, and backend, the load balancers, and how those servers are configured. And that's what it talks about. In the same way, if you ask me, Praveen, we understand for infra we need it. On what basis for process we need that? And that's where it is very important to understand the architecture diagram for a process, because it will give a clear picture of what is happening and what are the resources used, ideally the systems being used in this process, right? So on this note, I can simply say, okay, there is a user who's triggering an email, and there is a bot which is reading the email and getting the input and doing some business logic and then sending the output and email. So here I can simply say that the application used is only X, email, right, on this image. But ideally, if I elaborate it for a specific process, then I'll clearly understand whether I'm using SAP or DB or Excel, or for that matter any access DBs like that. So that sort of gives me an understanding about how things are going. At the same time, how my, let's say, this plays a very major role when you are doing processes with human in loop concept, right? Especially when you are doing human in loop concept, this plays a very major role. How the robots are interacting with humans, and how humans are providing value, details to the robot, right? That will be clearly explained in this architecture diagram, and it is very important. Okay. And then next time is runtime details, because by this time you will be analyzing the entire process, and peak hours, non-peak hours, and everything. So you will clearly understand what environments this process is going to be executing on, input data, how it looks, what kind of data type you're expecting, expected output, whether it's an Excel file or an email with attachment, email without attachment, email with custom body, right, and all those things. And what is the trigger for this process? Is it an automated, or what kind of processes it is? Because at the top, if you see, we have already considering whether it is attended or unattended. Accordingly, we need to mention the trigger here. And queues, it is very important, guys. Mentioning about assets and queues within your process is the most important thing. You can ask me, Praveen, if you go to orchestrator anyway, you will find all of my queues and assets. That is true. But what if your organization is using global assets, right? It was never considered the global assets when you're migrating the projects if you don't specify in the document, right? Because you cannot map any process name to the global assets. The global assets are free from tagging it to any process, because they are used across all the projects, right? So while using such scenarios, if you have a dependency on a specific global asset which is there in one environment, and while moving, if that is not available in a different environment, it's going to mess up with your process execution. So that's where it is very, very, very important to mention all the assets. If it is a credential, you don't need to mention the values of the credentials, but other than that, you need to clearly specify what kind of credentials it is holding. You cannot simply say that you give the asset name and then you cannot simply leave it out blank. You need to clearly specify what kind of credentials you are expecting from it. And if it is related to DB, you need to clearly specify whether that credentials has edit access or view access, because with DB, this creates a major concern, right? They don't give you unnecessarily the right access if really your process doesn't need right access, because you're playing with DBs. So likewise, so it's your responsibility to make sure we will mention all these things, and how you are using orchestrator for the scheduling and then storing of those things. And as we discussed, credentials, if you are using queues, we also need to mention the queue name, schedule details if you are using any or automated schedules, right? And resolutions, it comes when you are mainly dependent on image based automation. If in case your process is majorly on the image based automation, so specifying the resolution is also mandatory. And I'm reiterating the same thing. So just because this layout is like this, it is not required you people to use the very similar layout. You can customize these layouts, but the reason why I'm showing you this, because I want to stress this key components which are important. So irrespective what layout you use, these components are important and mandatory, right? And coming back to the project name, so we give all the details about the project, and then if in case there are any prerequisites, there are certain processes which might require shared folder, right, which might internal should contain input, output, temp, or etc folders structure, or the pattern, the parent structure. So that is all important. And also you need to specify clearly if you are, if that prerequisite are tagged to any specific version, it is also required to specify those details, because any minute details related to version and all, they might create exception or errors in the production runs, right? In order to avoid all those things, it is very important to keenly mention all those things, and that is where this SDD plays a very key role throughout the life cycle. Because if it is a PDD, you may like use it till the deployment phase, because you will get everything so far from it. But SDD is not like that. Once you deploy it and then you hand it over to the support, still they need to use it, because while doing any cleanup activities or while doing any fixes, anything like that, so they need to definitely get to this SDD, and they need to understand what happened here. Okay. So likewise, we also need to mention reused components, which are nothing but our XAML files. If you are using any reusable, if in case you are using libraries, specify that you are using library. You're not using library, but you are using XAML files, then specify those XAML files. And for this is organization to organization. If your organization is maintaining all these XAML files in a Git repository, giving that repository will be an additional benefit. Okay. And if the process is creating new components, right, reusable either libraries or the XAML, so specify those things. So accordingly, the support team might take an action to move it their repositories, right? And most of the cases I've seen in a couple of projects where just because we asking them to give the workflow name and description, they just simply dump the name of the workflow and then write some one liners. It should not be like that, guys. So take some time and then try to explain what kind of input that this workflow is expecting and what kind of output that it will generate, right? Giving that will also give an understanding for the next developer or the user who is working on your process for any code fixes or changes, right? Code changes. So it will give a clear understanding for him, so that okay, I need to only work on this XAML to fix it. I don't need to touch the other thing. Just because you give name of this thing and then once one liner, it may not give a detailed explanation for the next person who is working on this project, right? And the packages, this purely plays a major role when you're working with a dispatcher and performer, or your parent process has sub processes associated to it, right? And that's where you deploy multiple packages, right? So that's where you specify that this package deals with this, place as a dispatcher or the place as a performer. Or else if it is related to sub processes, specify that this is a sub process which takes this file as input and gives it as an output, and this output is going to be considered as an input for my package 2, and wherein the package 2 generates another output which goes in a chain reaction, right? So architectural diagram, the same point which is added twice here, but ideally we will maintain one such diagram throughout the project. Okay. And this is most ignored, I think, a component in the throughout the SDD. But for my understanding, this is the major important thing, because most of the essays ignore these future improvements. Because recently I had a conversation with one of my friend in US. So they are working, like there was a project which was running 4 to 5 hours per day, and that was running on Internet Explorer. So they got a notification that they are moving out of Internet Explorer to Edge. So what the development team has done, they converted the Internet Explorer entire package to Edge. But just before the day of publish, and they received one more email saying the URL of the project has changed. Ideally, the project in the sense whatever the applications they are working on, right? The web application, the URL got changed. So ideally they thought it might be a simple one because just the URL change you can fix it, but unfortunately it had an impact on the visuals, but not the entire project, bits and pieces of it. So just before the day of deployment, they heard this news and the entire process was like went back to the redevelopment. So this is very important. You need to understand, once you are trying to design a solution, you need to clearly understand whether the process is going to undergo any changes, UI changes or the URL or the deployment or any environmental changes within the next 6 months. This is a must and should thing that a SA should consider throughout the project. Not throughout the project, every project. Okay, this is the most important thing, or else all the efforts you spent might be of no use. Okay, and also certain assumptions, if there are any assumptions for the process, thinking that this might be coming in this way, or this look and feel of this should be like this, or the data should be in this format from the tool or the whatever the integrations you are doing, right? If you are using with APIs, so you say that this is our assumption that our API schema sticks to this particular schema. So these are very important. Okay, so the best way you design the SDD, so it gives whoever works on that SDD or whoever looks that SDD will give a feeling that okay, this was properly analyzed. The more you have the empty spaces, I have seen a lot of documents, people has a tendency to leave certain things which are not mandatory, ideally which are optional, so they'll leave out everything. But filling up those things as much as possible, that will give a more advantage for the automation and also for the next support people and then maintenance activities. Okay, and then last nothing but least, glossaries. So far UiPath has mentioned the terms which they have used, but in real time we might be using different terminologies while you are updating things. It is our responsibility to clearly explain what is that mean. Okay, at the end. And finally, so we're going to look into the single and multi-board architecture and then how it's going to differentiate, right? So on a single board architecture, what happens, the developer develops it from the studio and push it to orchestrator, and then that's where that process will be executed in a single bot. So there is no such dependency, right? Because the robot will simply kick back the output to the end user. But here on a multi-bot architecture, so there are multiple bots that are deployed and that are running parallelly, not one after other or something. They are running in parallel. So the communication between these three robots is very much important when the applications which are being used by the robots have any dependencies on the number of sessions triggered, right? Or the output that it is communicating to the business has any dependency with previous execution transaction. All these things needs to be considered while you are saying yes for multi-bot. Just because you have 2 3 robots, you cannot simply say that okay, this process can be executed directly. No, that doesn't work in real time. So it's a responsibility to clearly understand the pain areas if we scale it up to multi-bot, or else you stick back to single bot architecture which gives the input. But the reasons why we go to multi-bot is because whenever you move to multi-bot, you need to consider more scenarios and you need to take more fallback mechanisms than the single bot. Okay, your work will be more like double, but people may not see until they face it. So that's where it is better to understand and analyze all those things before development, so that the developer will be notified and then he will take the respective actions while developing. Okay, and now coming back to the SDD. So you say that, Praveen, it's good that you are saying the SDD can be modified after deployment everywhere, but how it actually happens in the real time? So once the SDD is approved, then only we'll proceed on the next stages, right? But let's say whenever you're altering something in the SDD, right, in future changes and all, once you modify these things and again go for approval, okay, it is okay to change the SDD, but at the same time it is important to also get approval on those modifications. Okay, so that's it for our today's session. Hope you got a couple of new things from the SDD document, though we are seeing this document throughout our implementation cycles and whatever the experience you people have. I hope you at least you got couple of points different from what you have known so far, and then we'll move on to the uh, resources section. So these are quick resources if you want to understand things related to SA, and then if you want to use the default UiPath template from the Automation Hub. People who have Automation Hub, they can directly download it. They don't need to go to this link. You can go to the Automation Hub and then you can get the template. But people who don't have Automation Hub in their organization, you can use this link. And I want to thank you, Niklesh, for hosting this amazing event, SN series, which is unique so far. And I also thank Sai Kiran and then Shivanarayana for being the moderator of these sessions. So, and also thank you so much for the UiPath community for spending your valuable time on a weekend attending this session. And then thank you so much for your love and affection. And then thank you, Bots Infinite, for your support in conducting this and then organizing this entire event. So now it's time for Q&A.
Praveen, if possible, just share that particular SDD template link and all in the chat window. That will help us.
Sure, definitely. Yeah.
Yes. So before Praveen do this, yeah, Praveen continue that. So thank you so much, Praveen, for the wonderful session on the STD and the solution design. So you can stop the screen. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. So really appreciated. You have very clearly explained and crisped the things. So I really appreciate it. So we have some of the questions in the chat window. He will share the guys. Just wait for the SDD template, and even we will upload the SDD template in the video. So don't worry about that. SDD template and whatever the deck he explained also he will explain. He will be sharing you. So whoever asking for, I mean, let me pause the recording for some time. So we need to ask again the new approval. Okay, thank you. Next question. I mean, so I think there will be later about this. Yeah, so just wait for the letterboard magic. So so uh, so Boti, I think you guys, if you keep your nicknames, I cannot help. So please join with the good name. I mean your proper name. Okay. So we'll go to the next question. So next question. What type of exceptions we need to mention in SDD? This is also explained by Praveen. So there are three options. What type of exceptions we need to mention in SDD? So correct answer is both. So business exception, system exception, and we'll see the leaderboard. So Mr. Boti, again, yeah, you need to change the name, brother, or you need to give me proper details. So Boti and Giri. Last and final question, guys. I'm just excited for the winners. So I'm just excited. Last and question. So the question three would be. The question three would be. We need to mention all the assets along with the type of queues in STD. So we need to mention all the assets along with the type and queue in STD. So this is also explained. So just take care. So yeah, most of you answered correct. So it is S. So guys, final leaderboard, please stay. Please stay. Before I proceed for the leaderboard, so please drop me. Sai, please give me an email ID. So it is
Yeah, it's already been there.
Okay, sorry. So it's nikhil.rp@gmail.com. I need your email, I need full name, your address, and your phone number, and your address with all the details, pin code, etc. etc. So the leaderboard are, we need to see who will be there. So uh, Boti, makeup Boti phase. I don't know if the name. Karti, congratulations. And second is Nilish Mahajan. So here, if you see, there is a Nilish. Girish is third, but we picked for two. So Boti, if you are there, can you unmute and tell your name, Mr. Boti? I have given the things.
Hey Nikhil, this is Viroop. So it auto took the name. I was entering it but by the time
No
it
problem.
got
Your
started.
good name.
This is Viroop, Niklesh.
Okay. Hi, Viru. Adi, congratulations. And Mr. Nilish, you are there.
Yes, 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 Nikhil.
Okay. So Nilish and Giri are same, or Nilish and Giri different, right?
Yes, it is
Yeah,
Nilesh.
this is Giri.
Giri, I think you are third if you see here. So
Yes, yes.
Nilish is second. So I think you just missed. So Nilish, hearty congratulations, brother. So
Yeah.
please drop me an email, Nilish sir and Virup. I think I guess right. So hearty congratulations both of you. So please drop me an email. And guys, like, can you quickly on the camera? So
Just stopping the recording. Is that fine, or is still
yes,
continue?
yes, 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 yes.